Oh boy, we're getting close to the end of the year here. We're getting damn close. For some odd reason, we missed last week. We didn't miss that last week. This week, it's always fucking hard doing this to say what time it is. Currently, you're listening to the podcast that we did with Robb Wolf, and it is an excellent one. It is my third, I believe, with Robb. I've been a huge fan of his for many years, read just about every book that he's written. Just a phenomenal guy who's definitely got his head screwed on straight and does a beautiful job of calling bullshit where there is bullshit when it comes to conspiracy, and does not hesitate to call bullshit where there actually is conspiracy. And just love this guy. Love what he's done for the health and wellness community, and I love what he continues to do for the planet through his Instagram and his podcast with his wife, and how he educates his daughters, and being a jiu-jitsu practitioner and all the things that he's into. I continue to be a fan of Robb, so thank you, Robb, for coming on the podcast. This one was dope. We took a deep dive into many of the issues going on in the world. I kind of I follow Robb on Instagram and was just peeping through, and I was like, I think we've got plenty of topics to cover here in a little bit more detail than you can get in an Instagram post. And it was great. It was great catching up with him. Check out his stuff. We'll link to it in the show notes, and where you can find him, his podcast, all that good stuff. There are a number of ways you can support this podcast. First and foremost, share it with a friend that you know is down to listen. Somebody that's like, oh man, I love Robb Wolf. You did a podcast with Kyle? Awesome. They're going to listen. If any of the topics we cover today from World Economic Forum or any of the old who's that we've been talking about for the past couple of years, if people are into that, share it with them. And without further ado, my brother, Robb Wolf. Robb Wolf, welcome back to the podcast, brother.
Always an honor to bring down property values for you. So if you're foolish enough to let me on, I'll come in like the drunk uncle. Thank you.
We're living close to each other. We're about to be even living a little bit closer to each other as we were building out this farm in Lockhart. So hopefully don't bring down the property value too much. Although I don't want a mass exodus from California to New York into Lockhart. Come to Austin, keep your 30-minute drive, and we'll be good.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, look, I've been following you online. I've always loved your content. Every book you've written is one that I've really chewed on multiple times. I've recommended to people. The past 2.5 years for anybody with their head screwed on straight has been a head scratcher. It's been like a kind of a, like we're living in bizarro world, I think is one of the safest ways to put it. Like, what the fuck is going on here?
Right.
And I think it's been really apparent for people who have been switched on from the sick care system to what actual healthcare looks like. What does it actually mean to be healthy? What does that entail? Do I need pills and potions and all this bullshit to do that? Or can I actually solve this mystery through diet and movement and sleep? And I don't think it's been that challenging for people to kind of call bullshit where it is if they already understood it that way. And who better than yourself? You wrote a book with Diana Rogers, Sacred Cow. We talked about it last time on this podcast, that really exposes all the mistruths that there are regarding cattle farts or burps, soil degradation versus soil regeneration. I've got my Force of Nature shirt on right here. Our buddies out in Fredericksburg. To continue for you, what is it like to continue to see this push for cell-based meat and crickets and the climate talk that's happening right now? And I think you and I can both intelligently talk like, sure, climate change. All right, but what are the true solutions to this? And why does it seem that the answers keep circling back to something that someone can profit from?
Yeah, and I'm okay with people making a profit. I'm really a market-based capitalist at my soul. So that said, however, the stuff that I think arguably what you and I are pushing for is this decentralized, transparent process where people get to pick how they want to live and the ways they want to live, with some understanding that there are trade-offs and costs and benefits tied into every decision that we make. But whether you're talking about homeschooling or buying locally sourced food or just simply taking your health more into your own hands, like having a concierge medical thing, which sounds really hoity-toity, but a lot of people can do it for far less than what they're spending on health insurance. And the bugger then also is that you have to then also typically have some sort of backstop medical insurance around it. But a lot of what I think we are advocating for is this crazy thing of self autonomy, of sovereignty. Like I want to make the decisions about how I and my family and my community live, and I want to be engaged and a part of that. And the flip side of this, and it's so fascinating to me because, and I hate to break this down into like this side versus that side, but it is, it is kind of the way the world plays out. The folks that historically I would have thought would have been very anti big government, big business. These are the folks signing up for like, oh, no, man. The CDC said, like Bill Gates said, and they're just like hook, line, and sinker. And what they're advocating for is this centralized medicine, healthcare, information, in a way that would make George Orwell like blush, like fucking blush. Like, oh, I can't believe like this is so, it's like a trope. It is so over the top, ridiculous the way that people are trying to sell this. But yet you can get your head lopped off online for even suggesting that there's maybe some cracks in this facade. One thing that's been really interesting, like the Impossible Burger, like some of these fake food deals. Diana and I were so frustrated with those because they're not regenerative and they're not even economically viable. Like what Diana pointed out in Sacred Cow, that a pound for pound Beyond Burger is more than twice as expensive as grass-fed filet. And this is supposed to be like the solution to the world, and people are like, oh, your grass-fed meat is so hoity-toity and everything. It's like, well, grass-fed ground beef is actually very inexpensive. And even conventional ground beef, I still don't actually have that many issues with it, particularly if you're this, young family just getting going, living at the margins, and you got to really, pay attention to your budget, which a lot of people are in there. It's like, eat that over, all the other garbage that we could eat. But it's fascinating. Like Beyond Burger and Beyond Foods had all this money, all this cachet, famous people, and it's failing. And it's failing because the thermodynamics don't work. It's kind of like if you were trying to engineer a refrigerator to work and it needs pumps and compressors and everything, you're like, we don't need any of that stuff. Like, we're just going to turn a fan on and somehow it's going to magically make shit colder. And it's like, no, like that's not the way that the world works. And Impossible Foods and a lot of these cell-based entities are running up against the reality that this is kind of an ironic thing. I know I'm jabbering like an idiot, but COVID created all these supply chain issues and everything. And it also created these economic challenges where like interest rates are going up and all the dumb money that's been circulating in the kind of Wall Street investment scene is gone. And so there's really a tightening of belts and a tightening of purse strings. And what we're finding is that there was a absolute mountain of dumb money that was put into these, fake foods, the cell-based foods, the meat alternatives and whatnot. And just about to a company, they're failing. And it's because it's really, really expensive to try to grow this stuff. Like, you need a lab, you need all the raw materials, you need to heat and cool it, you need to put antibiotics in the growth medium. Otherwise, you grow a giant tub of toxic sludge. And there is kind of a reality that like sunlight, grass, and cattle's the way that evolution has been working for millions of years, something along that line. It's a really efficient system. No matter what everybody else says about it, it's actually remarkably efficient, and it has all these side benefits. You have potentially decentralization of economic infrastructure of people growing and distributing their own food more locally. You have improvement in water capture and carbon sequestration, local ecosystems, and there's definitely some challenges around the industrial food system on the animal husbandry side, but it's very solvable. Like we don't need it. It's not like we're reinventing some massive thing. It's like it's iterative process. Like it's a very relatively easy thing to fix. And like you mentioned, some of the challenges early on around climate change. The world has been warming for a long time. Like the Netherlands, 2/3 of the Netherlands is below sea level, and they've just been building dikes and dams, and they're one of the most vibrant economies in Europe. And so it's like, do we ignore climate change? No, but it is also one of the crazy things. It is not an existential threat. It's a problem that we have to deal with. It's like I get snow in my driveway and it's like, okay, I got to plow it today. I have a problem to deal with. My pipe broke. I have a problem to deal with. Humans are really good at dealing with problems so long as we have good, accurate information and we're not tortured into terror. If we're not terrorized, then we can sit back and be like, okay, yeah, I can figure this out and we can tackle this as a community. But we're being forced into these decisions at the point of terror, and we make bad decisions, as a consequence. And again, I know I'm kind of bouncing around and rambling here, but it is interesting though that a lot of the terror tactics, a lot of the even, the like, hey, we're going to reinvent the food system, it's failing. But the bugger is that it's causing a lot of damage and a lot of suffering along the way. Like part of my if I'm cynical that day, I'm like, I don't need to do a goddamn thing about any of this because it's all going to sort itself out eventually. Because there's no way that you're going to displace a global food system by growing it in a vat. It's not going to happen. There's no way it's going to happen. But there will be some people that make a bunch of money before it fails. There will be a bunch of folks that have problems. Like right now, the Netherlands is acquiring 3,000 farms that they're going to take offline. The government's going to buy these farmers out and then take them offline to meet climate goals. And what's going to happen there is that they're going to end up with a food security issue. And it may be 5 months, it may be 5 years, it may be 50 years, but they're going to end up in a food security scenario where this farmland that was taken offline needs to be brought back in, but they have nobody with the knowledge, nobody with the infrastructure to do it. And people are liable to starve and have problems. So there's going to be this pain, but we solve problems. Humans are great at solving problems, but we're also super fucking good at making problems. And that's probably the crux of all this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I see a lot of created problems. And I wanted to bring up the Netherlands. There was a great a short video from Russell Brand talking about this, and he's, of course, he's vegan, he eats all organic. And he's like, I would never wish in a million years that some government forces that upon people. If you want to eat meat, eat meat. Hopefully it's the best from the best sources, right? Yeah. If you're going to eat food, hopefully you're eating organic. But this pressure that happened with the farmers was switching from nitrate-based fertilizers into organic fertilizers, which are exponentially more expensive. And it's not regenerative. Regenerative is using the least amount of inputs possible. And it takes time to build that system. Yeah. But once you do, it's self-sustaining, right? So, but to force somebody's hand seemingly overnight, you're basically backing them into a corner where they can't win. Yeah, then you buy up these farms at pennies on the dollar, and you look at Bill Gates doing this stateside, and it's kind of like, are these the guys that are saying the sky is falling from climate change, and are these the guys that are flying in on 400 private jets to Davos each year? Right. This is all the same crew, right? Like, right. Is that what we're looking at here?
Yeah. Yeah. And, like I'm a huge fan and advocate for regenerative practices, but is it Sri Lanka that just went like, we're cutting, we're basically pivoting on a dime, our whole food production system. And they are a fascinating example of a country that was just awash in abject poverty 30 years ago, absolutely crushed with poverty, food insecurity. And then they had relatively open markets. They started having relatively open elections. They had these crazy things like a respect for rule of law and property rights, and all kinds of magical things start happening when you put this stuff in place. And it was one of the fastest growing middle and upper class segments of a population. It was a net food exporter, and it was using industrial row crop food system practices, which do have an expiration date on them. They are not regenerative, but they will feed people, and they can get people to a point where they're not in dire, abject poverty, living at the margins, and get, in that like Maslow hierarchy of needs. It's kind of like, okay, we're not starving. Now, how do we do this in a way that when we come back 1,000 years from now, multiple generations later are still able to live on this area and thrive and do things well? But this is going to be an iterative process. You can't just pivot on a dime. And they tried to pivot their whole food system on a dime, and people are starving to death. Like, and their economic base got absolutely destroyed. And it's all trying to cater to this kind of weird pie in the sky notion. There have been some very thoughtful pieces on why folks, bought into COVID, buy into the climate change narrative and all this stuff. And one of the most credible things that I've taken away out of all this is that the West has largely become less religious, which maybe is good, maybe is bad. But there's been this massive loss of religion and spirituality also. And arguably, this is a baked in the cake evolutionary need. Like, in addition to sleep and food and exercise, like, humans might need some belief in something greater than themselves, to really be healthy. And this thing that folks have attached themselves to in believing in something greater is like, I'm going to save the world from climate change. I'm doing my part to, fight COVID because I got all my kids vaccinated, even though their risk of even getting COVID is low, and certainly from dying from COVID is almost zero. But yet the vaccines themselves are untested and have this really gnarly like risk profile to them. But I feel emotionally kind of religiously attached to approaching this because I need to believe in something greater. And that's a tough one to fight. Like, that's a really tough one to fight, but it's going to be something that we're going to have to figure out how to face, and how to convince both the populace and politicians that, yeah, we have challenges, we have problems, but, like trying to spin a whole food system on a pivoted on a dime. Like, the only thing that comes to mind that's even remotely similar is like the Bolshevik Revolution, when once the Bolsheviks took control, the farming class actually was relatively wealthy. And because they were shifting into this kind of communist mindset, they thought that wasn't cool. And so they took most of their farmers, most of their food producers, and either killed them or stuck them in gulags. And then they put people who were high in the chain of command within the Bolshevik, kind of party, and put them on these ranches and farms and everything, and they had no idea how to run them. And then hundreds of millions of people starved to death, because they were just like, there was just absolutely no respect for the knowledge that is necessary to actually make food and distribute it and make these things happen. It's that's like the closest analogy that I can think of to what's been going on in like the Netherlands or Sri Lanka and some of these other places where they're trying to do good by these almost religious based edicts around we should be doing this stuff to mitigate climate change, but without really understanding that, okay, maybe some of these goals are laudable that we want to get to. Although I think we both agree that there's a lot of like animal husbandry is not the enemy of a healthy planet. It's just not. But figuring out a way to minimize fossil fuel inputs into our food system, sure, let's do that. But let's do that in an iterative process where we don't crash the whole goddamn thing and cause hundreds of millions of people to starve to death in the process, unless the goal is depopulation. And if your goal is depopulation, I am not your friend. I am your enemy, and I will die on that hill to fight it. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's beautifully stated, and it very well could be. I mean, when you think through rationally, like the decision-making process behind a lot of these things, what they've laid out. I've got a buddy named Michael Yon, who was a former Green Beret. He was recently on Jordan Peterson's podcast. He ended up flying Jordan Peterson out to the Netherlands to see what's happening firsthand. And he introduced me to a book called Red Famine, which talks quite a bit about the Bolsheviks and the Ukraine. and dives into that. And one of the things he was saying is what we're witnessing right now in Europe is all these are all the precursors, what's necessary to lay out for famine, and it could happen to Europe as soon as this winter or just a few years from now. But it looks like it's right around the corner if this path continues, and that's pretty frightening. And I really appreciated the point that you made too around religion. Jamie Wheel has an excellent book, Recapture the Rapture. I'm not sure if you've read that one yet, but
no,
it's phenomenal. And in one of the first chapters, he really dives into this. And it's as the when Nietzsche says God is dead, he's really talking about the old dying of the old guard of fundamentalism, even though there's still sparks of that around the world. But what that leaves is a gaping hole, and that hole will be filled with either wokeism or scientism or nihilism, and those three aren't going to do well for us.
No, they're not. They're not. And I think an interesting question is, why will they not do well for us? But like the wokeism and the identity politics, it's this neo-Marxist thing that we've danced this dance before. You look at, I have a dear friend. I lived with this Cambodian family for close to a year when I was studying Muay Thai down in Long Beach, California, and they escaped out of Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge. And they watched their country get absolutely destroyed by this identity politics. Like there's always kind of sectarian things that emerge within different cultures, but in Cambodia, when the Khmer Rouge really came into power and they wanted to, they had this grand vision of basically an agrarian society. They were going to bring everything back to an agrarian society, and it's a little bit like the Chinese view of this when the Maoists really came into power. But they created this you had people who largely had the same religions, largely looked the same, had very, very minuscule differences between them, but they managed to create enough friction around the tiny differences that they had between each other that folks were completely comfortable with killing each other in mass. This is where like the story of the killing fields came from, where my friends, they escaped out of Cambodia. They were pretty wealthy. His father worked in the banking system, but every couple of days they would go to bed and then wake up, and some family on their street, they would wake up and they were just gone. They like disappeared in the middle of the night and they're never to be seen again. So they squirreled away whatever money they could, and in the middle of the night they made a break for getting to the Thai border, and they got intercepted by bandits, and like they thought that part of the group that they were with did get shot and thought they were dead. And like it was so crazy, Kyle. I was at a wedding 20 years after all of this stuff had happened, and one of their daughters, like, I couldn't figure it out because the mom and dad of my friend Selah, they were pretty young, and then they had all of these kids. They had like 6 kids, and I was like, dude, these kids are really close in age. Like, how does this work? And then Selah told me that when they were trying to escape out of Cambodia, like these other kids' parents got machine gunned, at the border and just killed. And some of them were killed. And so his parents adopted these kids like on the fly. One of their daughters that they had adopted, as she was getting married, this woman comes running in the door. And like all of this stuff is going on in Cambodian, which I knew like 5 words of at the time. And like there was like this shock and everybody looking around. The woman running in was the real mother of the daughter getting married.
Wow.
She was shot, didn't die, pulled bodies on top of her to survive, to hide there, dug gold fillings out of teeth of dead people to be able to buy her way into Thailand, made it to the United States, thought her daughter was dead, was at a supermarket, and one of the checkout people mentioned, "Oh, Malika is getting married today." Malika was the name of her daughter, and it's kind of a unique name. And she was like, "Well, who are these people?" It was her fucking mom, And so like, wow. and I'm like poking my friend Salem, I'm like, "What the fuck's going on?" He's like, "You're going to have to wait and I'll explain all this stuff to you." But It's estimated like 3 million people were murdered. The whole society was crushed and driven back to like the virtually the Stone Ages, and it was all over this kind of sectarian identity politics, which is this wokeism, and it's and you and I are, I guess, concerned about it because we're white, more or less straight males born in, I, I don't get how like pushing back against this hatred and this insanity is a bad thing, but apparently it is, and there are all these historical examples of where this goes, and it's not a maybe, it's an always. It always goes this direction, because once we start dividing and categorizing people around their value based off of their identity, whether you're Catholic or Protestant or male or female or gay or this or that, versus like a human being. Whenever we start doing that sorting, people end up dead in the massive numbers. And so, my God, it's so concerning. And I do feel like there's a little bit of a turning. I felt like the train had so much momentum going the other way. Like, 2020, 2021, I was like, I don't know if this thing's ever gonna turn back around. I feel a little bit of a shift now, but it's still super precarious, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting times if you're, not a parent, and then if you're a parent, you're like, it's fucking nail biting times.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no doubt about it. Have you seen, probably haven't seen this, but maybe you have seen, have you seen Planet Lockdown? It was going around, Catherine Austin Fitz.
No.
Okay. I watched bits and pieces of it. I've heard her speak quite a bit. She was, I forget her role, but she was a part of, Bush Jr.'s White House and a cabinet member. And I think she had something to do with finance and really understands, a great deal. It has been a whistleblower on a great deal of the fuckery that's happening within our own government and governments abroad. And she's spoken a lot about this idea of a digital prison that, cameras going up, your Orwellian state, basically. For people that haven't seen it, it's, cameras on every streetlight. A lot of these went up in the last 2 years. America has more surveillance cameras per capita than China does. So when we talk about social credit scores and things like that, and people say that'll never happen here, it's kind of, the system's already being built is the long and the short of it. I was listening to an Indian fellow from the Silicon Valley, and I'll link to this in the show notes for people. It's a pretty cool Zoom call that got posted on YouTube. For now, it's available. And he really reiterates this very, very plainly. One of the things that he gathers at the end is if we don't learn from our mistakes, this will happen again. Whatever government becomes the new government, it eventually is infiltrated through, the ideas of greed, power, all the things that have kind of put us in this situation to begin with. He kind of poo-pooed on like smaller, communes and things like that. But really, I think it's not a solution to have 50 people living off the land and staying huddled together.
Right.
But it is a solution to have a small group of people living on the land that's connected to another small people living on the land and another small people living on the land. And the next county over, you've got some people. And the next county over, you've got some people. That really is a solution. There's an excellent book by Václav Havel. I think I'm saying that right. Jose will fix this in the show notes, but I think it wrote like Power for the People. He went to jail in the Stalinist takeover of Czech Republic. Mm-hmm. And he was imprisoned for not going along with it. He got out. He actually became the president of the Czech Republic. And one of the things he said that kept them afloat, so where they were able to be fully taken over, was the fact that they had parallel systems in place. Mm-hmm. And through that, they were able to trade and barter for things that they needed to make sure things didn't get that way. What are your thoughts on stuff like that? I mean, I know I just fucking rambled a lot about stuff you may have not been looking at, but it seems like the more real this side of the coin gets, the more necessary it's going to be to have things like this in place.
No, I'm right there. And, it's an interesting balance to strike. One could make the case, you need to go all in and have this completely off-grid setup, and you need to know how to raise all your own food right now and all this stuff. And if you want to do that, that's great, but it's a very that's a lifestyle that you're never going to travel to Costa Rica again, because nobody else is going to come take care of your farm and do all this stuff, And so uh, it it's interesting though that I think that there's kind of a middle ground there of supporting local infrastructure around food production, medical access, law enforcement, on and on and on, and having like actual in real life people interacting and doing things. Like we're in northern Montana now, and the cool stuff that happens around here, like there was a cider pressing a couple of weeks back before the snow really fell, and there were these folks that have these cider presses, and they had a shitload of apples that they were just going to press and like give some apple juice to people, and then use the mash to feed animals and do different things. But they're like, if you have a bunch of apples and you don't have a cider press and you want to make some juice, bring it down and we'll do it for you. And there was this big get together, and it was a couple of dozen people that while we were there, and then there were people rotating in for the 8 hours of the day. But there was a lot of interesting discussion and a lot of other good, interesting things that have come about since that. And I think that that's always kind of been there. But like the COVID story, and then just the kind of insanity within the political scene and whatnot, has made people realize we really need local connectivity. And I think that the point, it might be Naval that made this, the guy that you're referencing possibly, but trying to be a Luddite is not going to work. Like trying to just eschew technology and modernity isn't going to work. We've seen people try to do this in the past. And I mean, you have some examples of like the Hutterites and Mennonites and different folks like that really eschew a big chunk of technology, and they kind of have their insular communities, and that's fine. But it's largely like tolerated by the society around them. If you have a society that is like, well, we're not going to let you do that, then you don't get to opt out. They're going to come in and vaccinate your kids and, force educate them and do all that type of stuff. And that is where I think that some amount of thought put into resiliency, just thinking about food and energy and, heating and cooling and water access and all that type of stuff. And we live in more rural areas, so that's a little more amenable for us. People living in urban areas have maybe a different profile to be able to do that, but they still have stuff. Like you can still squirrel a little bit of food. You can still, have a little bit of water squirreled away. You can have your bug out bag and your get back home bag and, different things like that. You can learn some firearms training. You can have some self-defense training, and you can have community that you can lean on if things go sideways. There's a guy, Pavel. There's a guy that talked about, it wasn't the Czech implosion, but it was in Serbia and Croatia, and just talked about developing these parallel systems. Like maybe you should have some silver on hand. Something that we bought a shitload of are the little single serving alcohol containers like you would get on an airplane.
Oh, cool.
Because they never go bad. They're fine in heat. They're fine in cold. They don't really freeze. But if we needed to get into a little bit of a barter scenario, like that's a really nice, like in good times, people drink, and bad times people drink more. And, so like we have kind of a big flat of those that, if things got a little bit sideways, then we have a couple of these, bartering things, because I'm not great working with my hands, like, repairing things. I've got a little bit of medical background. Like I was an EMT, so I can stitch people up and probably set a bone if I had to and stuff like that. So I've got a little bit of tradable skills, but I think that all of those things are smart. And the interesting thing about it, when my wife and I have made decisions around where to go in building these parallel systems, the thing that is the decision maker for us, will it improve our quality of life today, regardless of whether or not the world goes to shit? And if it's a yes, and there's not too many, there's trade-offs with everything, but if there's not too super heavy in the trade-offs, and it improves our quality of life today, then we do it. So whenever we can make a decision that we do something that creates an opportunity for community and for us to, like we installed a simple pump. We're on a well, but we put this pump in where you can pump it, pump water out of the ground by hand, and then you can hook a hose up to that pump, and then a hose spigot, turn it on, and then I can pressurize my pressure tank for the house so that I could have water for
cool.
the house. It was really cool. And as a family, we figured out how to install this thing. And so my 8 and 10-year-old daughters, and I'm an idiot with this stuff, but I told them, I'm like, hey, I don't know how to do this, but this is one of the things that we're going to figure out how to do. And there were some cool online videos and stuff like that. And we got this thing installed, and then we pumped water out of the ground by hand. And my kids were like, fuck yeah, that's really cool. That was super awesome. And so we managed to turn that into a learning experience. And then we've done these other community-based things where we get out and meet people. And if there's older folks in the community that need some help, like yard work or whatever, then we'll go over and like do some stuff with that. And then lo and behold, when their apple harvest comes in, they're like, hey, we have 50 pounds of apples we don't know what to do with. And I'm like, I absolutely know what to do with those. We're going to eat those, So yeah, I think building these parallel systems is genius. And it doesn't have to be like turning one's back on the current world or your current career or society. I mean, maybe you need to if certain parameters are there, but I think we can find a little bit of a middle ground where we've got more resilience and we have a better community in real life immediately with us that creates those parallel systems, or at least has the beginnings of that stuff going on. One of our good friends, they own a bison ranch nearby, and their big problem, and the problem of all the folks locally who produce meat, is that the processing options are very limited. Like, people have to send meat far away typically to get it processed. There's not that many options here. And so folks have been looking at putting together kind of a co-op where there would be 3 or 4 mobile slaughter units that could be owned within the co-op and go to different places and be able to process this meat. And it would be enough that you could keep a good segment of the local area in meat just using these mobile slaughter units. And it's something that the FDA oversees, but it's not controlled in the same way that like a brick and mortar facility is and stuff like that. But that was something that grew out of this awareness that, like, okay, this choke point with food, access is at the slaughter and butcher level. Like, we saw that during COVID when all these folks were getting sick in these big slaughterhouses, and they just shut down, and there was plenty of food available. They just couldn't get it out to folks, and we started having some shortages.
Yeah, we've seen quite a few meat processing and food processing places go up in flames mysteriously in the last year and a half as well. And there was one article, it's interesting how all these are worded, but there was one article that said, all previous fires with regard to food processing, meat processing were arson. Like, they were all previous, but these are still under investigation. Like we're not sure. It's like, right. Really? We're not sure? You're not sure somebody lit these on fire? And that's another head scratcher. But yeah, I've been thinking quite a bit about that. We've started a regenerative farm. It's only 118 acres. We've got quite a few hands on deck, volunteers, people that are a part of that. And it's really just to produce more than we consume, so it's going to feed, a number of people locally, and all the excess, we've made friends with an organic grocer down in Lockhart, and we supply them with a lot of goodies. But yeah, the meat thing, that was a curious one to me. Even a lot of the regenerative stuff, if it's processed at a USDA facility, you're still shipping that animal. We brought animals in. All of our animals had to come in, other than the whitetail. And every time we brought an animal in, they're freaked the fuck out for 2 weeks. Yeah. I get really stressed because they've never been on a car before, never been on a truck ride. And to think about that, you've got this incredibly regenerative, amazing animal. It gets shipped somewhere. It's kept in the dark for 72 hours. The clamp goes on, and then no country for old Ben behind the head. That's not, halal. That's not kosher. That's not whatever the actual, attempt at having a sacred death would be. And we found that, if you own your own animal, obviously with the co-op, you guys found the same thing. If you own your own animal and you know how to process it, or we bring in, our good buddy, Jared Holmes, who works with Rome Ranch, is a excellent field guide for field butchering. And then you get to learn butchering. You get to learn a lot of cool shit that I never did before. It's a deeper connection to the animal and the meat that you're harvesting. And it's a really beautiful experience. It's akin to like putting your own water pump in. And now when you pump water, you're like, oh yeah, like we did that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you get it. I get the T-bone that I'm about to eat because I remember I remember doing the cut and deciding, do I want this to be a T-bone or do I want a ribeye and fillet?
Right.
And we said, let's go T-bone, and that's how it works. So, or New York and fillet rather. Yeah, I think some of the requirements of those that will continue to choose freedom over a docile, some form of docile enslavement, is going to require more work. It's going to require just saying yes. But as you mentioned earlier, it really is something where in the right set and setting, in a calm and present state, we're really good at problem solving. If we've got blinders on, and you think about that in a fight or in jiu-jitsu, if you're panic mode, you got tunnel vision.
You're so fucked.
Your field of view is gone. Yeah. It's like there's no options. All the options are gone.
Yeah.
So, opening that up, coming from a place of, a place of presence and equanimity, all those options open. Talk a little bit. You had an excellent podcast with Josh Trent. Talk a bit about how you convey this stuff to your family. You've got 2 daughters. I've got a son and a daughter. What are some of the things that you do to educate them on mental health and to really fill their cup so that they can keep that field of view open?
Man, one thing that I really try to do is not, and folks may call bullshit at this, or they may be incredulous, but I really try to talk about the different perspectives in the world first. I'm like, hey kids, this is my view of things. And like on the COVID side, like there are people that think that it's this existential threat, and that masks are effective, and that the risk reward story of a novel, injectable therapeutic that isn't technically a vaccine, that the risk reward thing, and we talk about. So I try to lay out like multiple perspectives on this stuff, and then I will tell them, I'm like, here's my take on this, and here's why. So I'm really trying not to do the like religious zealot angle on it, where it's like, oh, those goddamn conservatives or liberals or this or that. I try to couch all this stuff in terms of like, here's what people think about this, and here's the different ways that they look at it, and then where does reality emerge out of that. And that's really what I've tried to do. And I will be crystal clear with them. I'm like, this is where my opinion is on this, and here are the facts behind it. I encourage you guys, as you grow up and you get thrown different facts, if you see something that doesn't jive with what I'm saying, you call me out on it. You ask questions about it, and I need to be able to defend that. And defending it isn't saying, be quiet, not now, whatever. It's like, okay, old man, like you need to be accountable for this stuff. And they're only 8 and 10, but they're fucking smart. Like they figure stuff out. And what's interesting is they have naturally gravitated towards this more libertarian, like, I don't harm you so long as you don't harm me. If you start harming me, I'm going to harm you doubly because you started it, and I'm going to make sure you don't come back and try to finish it later and stuff like that. Both of them are good at jits. Both of them have a good stand-up game for being 8 and 10. So like they can dish some whoop ass on people, and they're just smart, but they're also very emotionally attuned to stuff. So, I mean, the big stuff that I try to do is make them critical thinkers. And this is the thing that I bring up again and again and again. These folks are saying this. So Sacred Cow is a great example because they got to watch the movie, and they're like, oh, my dad helped make that movie, So there's some pride there, and it's kind of cool. But I'm like, but let's check out these other things and what these other folks are saying. And we do. And I'm like, where do you see the conflict here? What do you see as being the stuff? They're like, well, those people are saying that these animals are the main cause of climate change. And is that really true? And then we'll dig in and look at some of Stephen Koonen's, book Unsettled. And it's like, well, no, the science seems to suggest this. And so these have been the things that broadly, I just try to make them good critical thinkers. And on the homeschool front, we are really emphasizing a math physics like background. They're not into physics yet, but we talk about it in kind of broad brushstrokes. And there's a great series of books called Life of Fred, which is amazing for kids, and it spans all the way from single digit addition and subtraction all the way up into calculus and chemistry. And what the guy does, he was a PhD in mathematics, but he integrates all this different stuff into the day-to-day learning. And it's in this story of this kid named Fred, who's a professor at Kitten's University, and it's very whimsical and funny, but there's a lot of cool shit in there. But the girls have already been exposed to concepts of like thermodynamics, like energy flows and inputs, and at a conceptual level they get it, you know. And so they're really creating these critical thinking skills. I don't know what the world's going to be. Like there's all this weird AI stuff that just popped up. Like I could put into the AI, like write a biography of Kyle Kingsbury and his exploits in the world. And this fucking AI will write something that's phenomenal, and it's like 0.2 milliseconds for it to do it, you know? So I don't know where, I don't know if you've seen this stuff. It is like jaw-dropping. It is crazy. And I don't know where that's going to take the world, but I do know that, again, to be able to navigate any of it, we need to not be stressed. We need to not be in fear, and we need some critical thinking skills. And we kind of need to fundamentally know how the world works. And if you can read really well and understand what you're reading, if you can communicate both verbally and written in a highly effective way, and if you understand mathematics at a reasonable level, and you know, like the basics of like chemistry and physics and biology and just, you know, systems ecology, even if you do nothing in the sciences, you have a good steeping for just understanding the world. You know, if somebody comes to you and they say solar power is going to be the answer to all of our problems, it's like, okay, cool. So talk to me about how much energy goes into making a solar panel versus how much we get out of it over the life cycle of that panel. People are like, oh, fuck. Okay, well, solar panel is a great thing in certain circumstances when you start putting some constraints around it like that, you know. But I'm hopeful that the girls are going to have a far better critical thinking Rolodex than I had at, you know, hopefully they'll have it at a much earlier age, because they're going to need it at a much earlier age than you and I did. You know, like the world was still good enough for you and me that I could be a complete fucking knucklehead and the world would still take care of me, more or less. Like it was like bowling for like little kids where the bumper lanes come up, and it's like you can only fuck up so much and you're still going to be in the game. But I think the stakes are higher now, and our kids are going to be the ones that are going to have to unfuck a lot of this stuff, and they're going to be need to be very agile of mind and good at critical thinking and good emotional intelligence and all that. So those are the things that I try to work on them with, is basic critical thinking skills, and then a good understanding of how the world works, you know, which I think energy flows, evolution, and then economics, you know, like understanding resource scarcity and how that drives decision making and you know, challenges and whatnot. And I think absent that stuff, I think that the world is magic, and I don't mean magic in like a whimsical, cool way. I mean it as in you are a victim because one is so ignorant of the way the world functions that you have no input or say in the way that things function.
Yeah, and to your point, there are quite a few people that are just along for the ride. I was looking at the Jordan Peterson clip that you had posted, talking about, you know, ID 2020 or ID 2030 and airports and facial recognition everywhere, and a lot of that gets covered in the YouTube video that I'll share in the show notes. But how many people are just going to walk right into that and say digital passport, cool, you know, like, and then not throw up. They're so ingrained in the thing that there's no critical thinking about it whatsoever. It's just like, this is the new technology. Sure, they don't think about what this leads to or the potentials there, and any talk or rhetoric around social credit or what's happening in China, it's just so far beyond what they see in their day-to-day. This is a free country. That'll never happen here. You know, that they can just walk right into the thing. So much of what kids are, you know, even when in our education, I went to public school and then later in college, and my colleges were junior college in Arizona State, #1 party school in the nation. So it's not like I went to an Ivy League school or any of that stuff. But it seemed I got to learn a decent amount of things, and it didn't seem as much of an indoctrination as maybe it is today. It certainly feels with what they're teaching kids with relation to CRT and a lot of these things that it's very much indoctrinating them. And we've known for the longest time that school doesn't teach you how to think; it teaches you what to think. The memorization of facts, right? And I think the beautiful opposition of that, whether it's unschooling, homeschooling, however that looks, is we have to teach our kids how to think, not what to think. There's no memorization of anything other than a couple of rules of thumb when it comes to arithmetic and things like that. But really what it's about is being able to think critically for themselves, because there's the percentage of people in the population that will be able to do that in the coming generations is slim, and the world needs it more than ever.
It really does. And, my cynical side, I'm kind of like, am I setting my kids up to be heroes to help save a future world, or am I painting a target on them that they're going to be the first ones against the wall because they stand out? And I don't know, but it's there's all that saying of better to die on your feet than on your knees, and all that type of stuff. And I definitely subscribe to that. And my wife read a book, the Fourth Turning, and like I haven't been able to read it, but she's given me a good synopsis of that. And I think that the cyclical view of history, I think there's something powerful there. And there's also something, there's hope, because it's like, okay, there's not just a guarantee of a dystopian future. Like maybe we can thread this needle and get out the backside of this thing and have more freedom and more opportunity. This is some of this stuff like Web3, like the NFTs and blockchain and stuff like that, which I know is taking a beating in the media because, like SBF, FTX collapsing and all these different things. But I really do think that that blockchain technology and the decentralization of everything is the route through this. Like the more centralized power is, the easier it is to control and manipulate markets and people and everything. And so, yeah, man, creating good little critical thinkers, like it's going to be a lot on their plate, but it's going to be a lot on their plate either way. And again, I think arming these kids with the ability to be resilient, to be tough, to never get up, to never give up, these things that will hopefully serve them really well, and hopefully serve the future of the world very, very well, because we definitely will need that. The homogenization of thought and within like all that CRT stuff. There's a great book called Cynical Theories, which really digs into the history of where the critical theories emerged. The neo-Marxists in the late 1960s, early 1970s realized that Marxism had failed, like abject fail. Like Cuba was kind of the last holdout, and like it was an absolute disaster. But they weren't willing to give the thing up, and even though they acknowledged it was a failure, so they rejiggered it, and instead of just going straight ahead with this kind of Marxism as Marxism, became critical race theory and gender theory and all these different things. But it is always a segregating of the population. It is never a looking at a human being as a human being. Maybe I'm an asshole, but I'm just an asshole. I'm not an asshole because I'm white and male and cis and have kids. Like those things don't make me an asshole. Those are peripheral things about my life. If I'm an asshole because I'm an asshole. But if you want to get people in a state to be really comfortable with killing their neighbors, then you make everything about all the other stuff and nothing about their fundamental humanity. And this is one of these things that I can't, when I say that, I feel this kind of emotive part to it, that it's like, that seems right. And I also don't see how I'm trying to control anybody. Like, who's in control with that? There's no, top-down control with any of that. But my God, there are people that get angry when I try to articulate or just throw that out there. I'm like, hey, what do you think about this? They're like, oh, no, absolutely not. Like, gender and race and this and that, these are the only things that matter. I'm like, really? That's it? Like the fundamental core of who this person is as a human being isn't the most important thing. It's all this other trappings. Like if they're black or white or yellow or whatever, but I'm blind and I have no idea what that means. I was born blind. It's like, I have no fucking idea what you're talking about. And that's the most important thing. It's
Yeah. There's an excellent book, two of them actually, from Douglas Murray, The Madness of Crowds, where he really dives into this.
Yeah.
And then the War in the West was also an amazing follow-up. But yeah, he really dives into CRT and as he goes through the problem in society, he looks to the really the best thinkers throughout our history. And with that in particular, he brings in Martin Luther King Jr. and he says, like, this flows exactly counter to exactly what he was talking about in his I Have a Dream speech. The dream that one day his kids will not be looked at by the color of the skin, will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by their humanity. It flies completely in the face of that. And anybody who's a parent and witnesses kids, like, racism is a taught thing. I remember racist kids, and if I'd go hang out at their house, it was the fucking dad or the mom that was regurgitating shit at way more often than the kids do, and by nature, the kid's going to become that way. I mean, it's just so far beyond the stretch of any imagination to assume that because of skin color, someone is inherently born racist. And Douglas Murray just does such an excellent job of showing, like, look, even one of the best thinkers of all time on race, you're going in the exact opposite direction of what this guy was trying to create for the world.
Yeah, and I feel like we were like a hair's breadth away from that dream being realized. And then, like early 2000s, I felt like, oh, we're getting close. We're getting closer, and then it just took this turn. But that's where, like, all this the CRT stuff kind of it went from the more social science side of the house in universities, and then the Brett Weinstein, Heather Hying of Dark Horse, like I never really understood the mechanisms behind this stuff, but as like the math and science and physics departments developed HR infrastructure, the HR folks were the products of these critical race processes. And then those people became the interface of who they hired and who they didn't, and started creating policies. And so where like when I was in my chemistry undergrad, none of this stuff seemed to exist. Like, I remembered some of my like poli-sci friends and different stuff. They were all into this. I'm like, how the fuck are you guys talking about that? Like, what are you getting educated about? What are you going to do with this? But there was none of that in the chemistry curriculum and chemistry scene, but it is now, and it has come about because of this HR interface being the gatekeeper of who now your chemistry and math and physics teachers are, and you gotta tick these certain boxes around that. Yeah.
Well, one last thing I want to leave us with before we jam. You posted about it. It's been something that's been shared far and wide. James Cameron, who's getting ready to release the 13-year long-awaited sequel to Avatar, has recently been in the media talking about testosterone as a toxin that should be removed from masculinity. And your reply to that was classic, and it's something I didn't even think about. Just aside from the funny memes of one of the guy from Napoleon Dynamite as the Terminator,
right,
the no testosterone Terminator, things like that. But let's talk about this for a minute, because he's a guy. I think he helped fund What the Health. He also has $43 million invested in a pea protein company, and he's been on the bandwagon, beating the vegan drone and down with meat and all these things. And now just to call any hormone in the human body out is just beyond me. But talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I was very delighted when Dr. Andrew Huberman popped into my comment on that, and he's like, "You're spot on." Like, what's been well understood is looking specifically at men. Men with normal high testosterone levels tend to be more empathic, more emotionally grounded, less aggressive. Like there's all this stuff. Now we can talk about knuckleheaded teenage boys, between like 15 and 25. We are idiots. Our frontal lobe hasn't formed yet. That's maybe a different story, and biology makes more boys than girls by a little percentage, because not all the boys make it through that process because we're idiots. So there's maybe a little bit of something interesting to unpack there. But there's this assumption that, masculinity, however you want to define that, is this bad thing, and that it's driven of this like high testosterone state. But this is one of these crazy things. He makes this statement not even aware that the dominant sex hormone in women is testosterone. So then what are the implications for that? Okay, well, if testosterone is bad, then women need to expunge themselves of testosterone also, which women with low testosterone levels have problems with muscle mass, with sexual function, with cognition. Like it's as if hundreds of millions of years of evolution and an endocrine system that goes back to sponges has some meaning for our biological, situation. And even, in modern kind of CRT stuff, like when people are wanting to do transitions, they do hormones or hormone blockers to try to more closely emulate the gender that they're wanting to emulate, So it's another one of these really odd things. It's ironic. It's remarkably bigoted and hateful and just ignorant at a profound level. Like, that is as uneducated as running someone down because of the melanin content of their skin. Like that is bigoted and ignorant and not based in science. And for James Cameron to suggest that testosterone is a toxic substance and that we need to terminate it from our bodies, and then solely assigning it to men, not even being aware that it's a critical feature of women, and that testosterone is in higher abundance in both men and women, across the board. This kind of encapsulates this whole thing. It's like, you folks don't know what you're talking about. Like, you literally have no idea what you're talking about, but you're trying to steward all of our education, all of our media, all of our politics. You want to take over our food system, yet you have no idea about the fundamental truths of hormones in human adults, and we're just supposed to, buy into this. So, yeah, I don't know, man. It was really weird, and I had thought a lot about how to tackle that, and I'm like, well, be respectful and scientific about it, because it's hard to get critiqued around that, and there was actually relatively little blowback as a consequence of that. I can get cheeky and be a prick, with the best of them, but I was like, well, let's just be scientific and respectful, and that actually had a pretty profound response. Folks were like, I had no idea this was true. They got in and started researching, and it's like, oh, estrogen is reported in totally different units than testosterone in women. So it looks like it's higher, but it's actually just accounted for in different units. So, yeah. Funny shit, man.
Well, yeah, it's funny. I love having you on. You in an insane world, help keep me sane, and I appreciate that. Where can people find you online, and where can people listen to you more?
RobbWolf.com is where any action that I have going on, which I'm not doing a ton other than our Healthy Rebellion podcast, which I do each week with my wife. We do Q&A, and we cover a lot of different stuff. I mean, mainly health oriented, but it's become a little bit of a Dear Abby show as well, with some wacky but really interesting questions. So if folks have health related questions, definitely jam over to RobbWolf.com, fire off some questions to me, because I love answering that stuff. The interface with folks is the way that I stay relevant in this scene, because I can only know what I know, but when people are out reading and researching and thinking and experiencing different things, like it's like I've got 1,000 or 10,000 research friends that they go out and try to figure things out. And if they don't understand the topic, they can ping it to me. And maybe because I've got a little bit more depth in this background, I can dig into it and learn about it myself.
Very cool. It's been excellent having you on. We'll do it again next year. I hope you guys have a beautiful holidays and close out. And much love to you and your family, brother.
Take care, man. Can't wait to see you.